Welcome, listeners, to another episode of That's Some Crazy Shit with Kelly and James. I am the James part of that title,
and I'm the Kelly part. Hi, James.
I was getting there. So, today we're gonna have a gentleman come on and talk about cults. Remember, we talked about having someone come on.
Cults are crazy shit, right? And we have talked about doing an episode on cults, and we could go and research it. And this guy wasn't in the cult. He is a reporter who actually got wind of the story and wrote about the cult.
So Tony Russo wrote a book called Dragged into the Light. And this book goes into how this online cult formed and how all these... the woman manipulated the users, and there's reptilians. You're going to be, because that was your thing, Cal, there's reptilians. It is some crazy shit.
And, you know, it's even more crazier. The cult is still active today.
Right, after the founder died. And so then one final thing, Cal. The crazy thing about this is, we talked on a Thursday. Oh, let's do something on cults. Oh, okay. It'd be nice if we had someone. Friday goes by. Saturday morning, I'm watching the show based on his book. And then you send me the text. And you want to tell me what he sent you?
He sent me an email, actually, saying, hey, I would love to be on your podcast. I wrote a book called Dragged into the Light about this woman, Sherry Shriner, who, you know, had a cult and reptilians and all those good things. And that was exactly the same thing that you had watched that morning. And we had just talked about it that Thursday. So, safe to say, we manifested. You know, we need to do this with money, dude.
Serious.
We need to do this with money.
I feel like I'll start little.
Don't start little.
Oh yeah, that's true. Don't put a limit on it. My bad. Yeah, don't put a limit.
You're supposed to dream big or start big. It's like unlimited, like in money infinity.
I want it to rain money.
Infinity. All right, we're getting off topic. We got a guest we got to get to.
Sorry, squirrel. So I thought it was just a trip how he came up. So I think this is going to be a good one. You ready to bring him on?
I am ready to bring him on. Welcome to the podcast, author and reporter, Tony Russo. Tony, thank you so much for joining us on That's Some Crazy Shit. So excited to have you here. Me and James have talked about cults before. We haven't done anything on cults, so I'm really excited that you're here to talk about a particular cult.
Yeah, as soon as I saw the title of your show, I said, I'll bet they would talk to me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We love crazy shit, and this is crazy shit. So tell us exactly, like your book. Tell us about the book and the cult, and you know, so everybody knows. We know why it's crazy shit. Tell everybody else why it's crazy shit.
Well, the pitch that I like to give. So the book is called Dragged into the Light: Truthers, Reptilians, Super Soldiers, and Death Inside an Online Cult. As a brief aside, it took us a long time to come up with a subtitle that everybody liked. And so for about 6 months, I was calling it Dragged into the Light, something, 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 Sherry Shriner. And that's why I always have to try to go very slow when I say that. But it is about, broadly speaking, conspiracy cults in the U.S. And I look at that through this lens of Sherry Shriner, who had a cult on the internet. And her followers sometimes met with bad ends. The initial pitch for the show is that Sherry had an acolyte. His name was Stephen Mineo, and one day seemingly out of the blue, she sent him a note, a text message that said, your girlfriend is a witch and a reptilian, and she's going to kill you. And Stephen got really mad, and he started attacking the cult leader online. And then about 2 months later, he died. He died with a bullet in his head, and his girlfriend was arrested for his murder, just like Sherry said. And that was the tip of the iceberg into a spiral of weird that I was just not prepared for when I started digging into it. But as I did,
How did you get involved, Tony?
Well, I had been I'm a writer, and a journalist. So I had been doing this show called This Is War, which is a podcast. And I did it for about 2 years. And I was interviewing combat veterans about their experiences and turning those into like narrative stories about their lives. It was like, hour-long biographies, 45-minute biographies. And the show ended, and I was looking for something else to write. And initially it was going to be a podcast, and then I ended up deciding I wanted to do something different with it. We kind of both decided that we wanted to do different things with the information, and they were kind enough to let me come off and write this book. And then I wrote the book. So let me just make sure I'm understanding you. Sherry Shriner had an online cult. It's hard, right?
They never met together. It was all done virtually.
Correct. I mean, so for the most part, some members would meet. They would go on these excursions that they called orgone missions. But what was kind of particular, I guess, about this cult was that it was mainly online. Like, they never all met at the same time. 2 or 3 people might meet. But yeah, no, she wielded this weird power over them just by her voice, just over the internet. And they were and are still devoted to her.
How many members are?
How many people are in this cult?
Yeah, I asked the same question. How many members?
So that's a tough number to come up with. All right, a gun in my head. My first reaction is probably about 1,800 when this goes down. At one time, she had claimed to have 10,000 followers on her Yahoo groups, and then at another time, she claimed to have, I think it was 3,000 on her email list. So the numbers are weird, but certainly a couple thousand, I would guess.
So the thing that fascinates me about cults is their beliefs. So can you tell us, like, what were the beliefs of this cult, and why was she the person in charge?
She was the person in charge because I think she kind of innovated. So broadly speaking, this is a Christian sect. These are people who identify as Christians, and they're, I think, along the lines of maybe the Seventh-day Adventist type of Christian, where they mostly follow the Old Testament. So they go to church on Saturdays. Well, these people didn't go to church. The day of the Lord for them, though, was Saturday, and they followed a lot of the Jewish prohibitions against pork and bloody meat and mixing foods. A lot of the dietary prohibitions. So that's kind of a big thing. It's increasingly a big thing among the evangelicals. This kind of a go back to a make religion great again kind of thing. And the 2 things that Sherry had going for her was she said that Paul the Apostle, who wrote a good chunk of the Bible, was actually an agent of Satan. And so the parts of the Bible that he wrote and contributed to were aimed at turning the churches more towards Satan. And this makes perfect sense. Paul never met Jesus, and people who think that, for example, many people think that the Catholic Church is the devil. And the Catholic Church is certainly heavily invested in the teachings of Paul. He's the one who said you could start eating pork, for example. So that's the rift number one right there. But the other thing that made her special was this idea of orgone that she stole from actually a New Age cult out in the Pacific Northwest, and she reappropriated it as a weapon for God, which was, I think that was the masterstroke. I think that's what made her different enough to attract so many people.
Wow. All online. That is crazy to me. And so where does the reptilian tie-in go into? Did she claim to be a reptilian?
No, she claimed to be able to tell who were reptilians. So, right, the reptilian conspiracy, and this is another kind of an innovation for her. The reptilian conspiracy, I think, is most famous with a guy called David Icke. He's an English guy, and he runs around the Queens of Reptile. Right. So he's the real innovator in the reptilian space, as far as I understand it. But what Sherry did was she said, David Icke has it all wrong. These aren't aliens. These are demons. It's a form of demonic possession to be turned into a reptile. So she has like a hierarchy of hell, with Lucifer as like the top guy, and then his generals are the reptilians, and then his progeny she calls the serpent seed line, and these are all sorts of different, evil kind of beings, and they make their way back up into people. And so if you are the progeny of a descendant of one of these reptiles, then you have reptilian nature, and that reptilian nature can manifest itself. Or they can just grab you and cut a hole in your head and pull your soul out and stick the reptilian soul in. Either way, that's another way it gets done.
Wow, I did not know that. But I did.
We've talked about David Icke before.
Yeah, we did talk about David Icke because I had told James that the Queen was a reptilian overlord and his whole thing. But I'm fascinated with cults, and so when you're writing about this, can you give us some examples of some of the things that the cult did as a cult, like some of their practices?
Well, the biggest and the most exciting practice for me is called orgoning. Sometimes they'll call it gifting orgone. And this is Sherry had stolen the idea of orgone from a guy in the Pacific Northwest. And this man claimed to have been to Africa and cured AIDS and malaria, I think, with orgone. And orgone is essentially it's resin. It's bondo, and inside you put a coiled piece of copper and some crystals and some metal, and it generates positive energy. The story of orgone is also a little involved. I don't know if you want to hear it, but it's pretty bizarre. It was.
Yes, we want to hear it.
Yeah, I'm waiting. Yeah, I'm fascinated.
I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but this is quite a story. So there's this guy, and his name was Wilhelm Reich, and he was a noted psychologist. In Vienna, he worked with Freud. He worked at Freud's hospital, and he was the first person who said that sexual repression could be tied to psychosis, and that's something we still believe, right? We still believe that sexual repression can make you nuts. That was his idea, and he decided that the orgasm was an ethereal thing that we kind of plugged into, and his idea was, what if we could capture it? Now, this is, at the time of the atom bomb, right? They've discovered how to split the atom and things like that. So there's X-rays are relatively new. Radiation is kind of all the rage. And so he posits this kind of sexual radiation called orgone and orgone energy. And then he sets out to make a box that can capture it and create like a greenhouse effect and kind of target this orgone energy and give a person a sense of overwhelming well-being. And he does just that. And he gets chased out of Germany by the Nazis, and he ends up in Princeton talking to Einstein about his theory of orgone energy. And so Einstein says, "Oh yeah, I'll take a look at the box." And one of his research assistants almost right away said, "No, this doesn't work, and here's why." But by then, Reich was kind of possessed of this idea of orgone. So he just said, well, science just hasn't caught up to this fact yet. We didn't used to know what oxygen was like. So eventually they'll figure out the tools that it takes to measure orgone energy. But I know that it's a real thing. And so he goes on at one point a government mission to do cloud bursting in the West. So cloud bursting, if you don't know, is the idea of focusing psychic energy on clouds to either make them go away or to make them congeal into rain. And so the government apparently paid him for this rain-making experiment that he was doing. And that was really the last of the authority that he kind of needed, this notion that he was a government scientist and that no one believed him made him a perfect candidate for the beginning of a conspiracy theory, and which is that orgone is the most powerful energy on the planet, and the government is keeping it from us because of Big Pharma doesn't want us curing people with orgone, and the energy conglomerates don't want us being able to harness this energy into a power that we can focus.
I like that conspiracy theory.
Oh,
That's crazy.
In the sex trade industry, you're probably not like that either.
Yeah, exactly. What if you could just sit in the box? Well, the thing about the box is it was quite popular. What's his name? William S. Burroughs, the poet maniac, writer and maniac, had one. And when he would get dope sick, he would go into his orgone box until he wasn't dope sick anymore. And the story I like to tell without being too dismissive of any kind of medical approach like this is I went and got acupuncture once for anxiety. I was assured that it would work, and it did work. I went in there, and he would put a warm light and focus it on my stomach, and then he'd put the pins in my ears, and then he'd put classical music on. And then I just started to feel better and more relaxed. And I went like 3 or 4 times. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, you know what? He could put a birthday hat on my head. I'm sitting in a quiet room listening to classical music with a warm thing on my stomach. So I just started to put something warm on my stomach, and I did without the needles, right? And so this idea that if you're in a quiet place, you're going to feel better is obvious. But people thought that they were being cured by... they're like, I do feel better. Of course you do. You sat and meditated for half an hour.
And we talked about the power of meditation right there.
Yeah.
So, back to the cult. So
yeah, I'm so like I said, there's so many.
It's fascinating. Cults are a trip anyway, right? Cults are just. I'm over the years when you hear about different cults and the things that they've done and the things that they make people do and how people just get caught up. And so I'm even more fascinated because this was basically a virtual cult.
Right.
And so you're not even in the same place. You're all over the world with all these followers. So what happened? what happened? I mean, is the cult still alive and well today?
Well, spoilers. Sherry is no longer with us, but the cult is still active. As I've heard from one of the cult members recently, who I've just kind of been emailing back and forth with, that they're still doing very well financially, and that they have a lot of international subscriptions and things like that. I don't know if it's true or not. And that's when you're getting all your information from people who believe that there are lizard people running around. It's like, well, who do I believe? Well, I like your story, so I'm going to believe your story. But there's no, like, I would like to tell you that, yes, I have confirmation that Sherry's cult is just doing very well and is financially, solvent. And I have a little bit of evidence from that, but I do have it from someone who doesn't like them very much anymore, right? And so you kind of balance that. But I do know all of the websites are up. All of Sherry's sites are up, even though she's no longer running things. And she has anointed a successor. Shael is, I think, that person's official name.
Now, did she go to prison? Did Sherry go to prison?
Sherry died.
So what happened?
Yes. So what happened is Sherry went to these great lengths to kind of drive these people over the edge is kind of the short version of it. And when Barbara's trial was coming up, she just had a heart attack and died. It was like her third or fourth heart attack. She was a big woman. She smoked, she ate poorly, and she just sat behind the computer all day, shouting hate at people. And so then one night, she just had a heart attack. The prosecution had arranged to have an interview with her for the trial of Barbara Rogers. I just kind of skipping to the end a little bit, but when Barbara Rogers was on trial, they were going to see if Sherry would testify, to see if she would be a worthy witness. I don't think she would have been.
Witness.
Yeah, and but as it turned out, it didn't matter because she died. And they have this great story about how God came and snatched her because the devil was coming to kill her. And the idea that God would kind of like rush down and like nah, is just so hysterical to me. I just find it amusing that's how petty God is. That their God is so petty that he can't keep her alive anymore, but he doesn't want the devil to have the satisfaction of having killed her. So he kind of ascends her. He takes her whole soul up.
That is some crazy shit. I am still tripping that this is a virtual cult. She basically, as far as Barbara Rogers and the murder, Sherry basically predicted that, right?
That's one way that you can say it. I don't know that she predicted it. So Sherry had a long history of separating couples. She would get very jealous of couples if one of them was very into the cult and one of them wasn't into the cult enough. Then she would try to separate them and make them choose. And she'd done this lots of times in the past, sometimes successfully. I heard a story about a guy. I didn't put it in the book because I didn't get permission to use his name. And it was a sidetrack anyway, but there was this one guy who went out and he left his wife and his family and he just worked at Sherry's for like 18 months. And then just walked back to his house in Montana. He became like this wandering, like drunken homeless person. There are several stories like that. So I believe that Sherry was trying to separate Stephen from Barbara. I believe that Barbara had too much influence, she thought, over Stephen. I don't think that she expected Stephen to fly into a rage over the idea of having to having to choose. And in the end, Stephen couldn't make the choice. And it drove him right to the edge, is what I say.
Wow. That's just crazy to have that much power. Now, would Sherry make videos when she spoke to her followers, or would she just do it all through typing?
Well, she actually had a blog talk radio show. Blog talk is kind of a fringe. A lot of it's I guess it's the Reddit, it's the audio Reddit, maybe you could say it that way. They a lot of kind of alt-right would be, talking head type people have shows on blog, and also perfectly normal people, people who don't want to do podcasts, they want to do a live radio show. That's also a way to do it. The people I met from there were all a little bonkers. That's why it has a bad rap with me. And so that's what Sherry's main form of communication was. She would do an hour, between 2 or 3 hours a week. She would do an hour at a time, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays sometimes, Mondays and Fridays sometimes. And she would just talk about how everything in the news was a lie, and here were the biblical and reptilian implications of what happened this week in the news, or what happened today in the news. And it was relentless,
So when did she get started with all this? What's the timeline?
Well, I think she was in at least a minor league profit business at the turn of the century, in the late 90s. And I know that in 2001, she bought a copy of something called the Bible Code. I don't know if you recall that, right?
I've read the Bible Code, yeah.
Well, the Bible Code made a program where you could punch in key words of the Bible, and it would show you where they were and how they were related. And so Sherry bought this piece of equipment, this program, and then started making prophecy based on it. And at one point she was involved in something that's called the Prophet Club. And as best as I can understand it, it's kind of like a networking for prophets. And they go and they give each other prophecy, and they talk about how to do prophecy. And so she was involved with that for a while, and wasn't getting, I don't think, the kind of traction she had hoped. And so she moved on to Blog Talk Radio. I know that she was making shows in 2008. I think she was making them in 2004. I know that 2004 is kind of what she talks about is when she started to have a lot of followers anyway.
When did she die?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, in 2018, in January.
So not that long ago.
No, this was pretty recent. This was actually, when I started working on it, was when Barbara's trial ended, and it was back in the news because of Barbara's trial. That's how I heard about it.
So how did they name the successor? Did she name one before she died, in case? She
had, and again, it's, if you've been to Bible school for 4 days, you really understand everything about Sherry Shriner. She's like, I might not be with you, but if for some reason the Lord has to take me, this will be the person who's my successor. I mean, meanwhile, she knew that I think she knew she wasn't long for this world, because she was apparently in really, really not great shape. She was very sick, as I understand it, with heart failure or whatever, heart disease.
Did she target a certain demographic of people, or?
Not at all. Not at all. She had followers of every language, of every color. The only thing is she had a lot of Baptist people, a lot of former Baptists A lot of people who we think of as, so we think of evangelical churches, I think of evangelical churches and then like normal churches with names, right? There's like, like the Catholics, the Lutherans, the Methodists, people who have names, and then people who don't have names we call evangelicals. The right-leaning churches with names, like the Baptists, the Assemblies of God, some Lutherans. One of her victims actually was a Lutheran. The people that are on the right fringe of those, like, quote, legitimate and unquote religions often migrated into Sherry's sphere. And my theory is that they wanted it to be meaner. It's the only kind of way I can put it. They needed an excuse to be victimized that the Baptists or whomever weren't giving them enough of. They didn't feel important enough in the end times, which they really believe is every day. Every day they are really hoping that this is when the apocalypse starts.
So did she ask for money? Did people give her money?
She did very well. There have been a lot of numbers thrown around. The only number that I've seen, the number that I've seen in print was she had at the time of her death $150,000, and I think her GoFundMe. But she also had a PayPal and a Patreon, and she would get checks and sometimes cash in the mail. So if one of them had $150,000 in it at the time of her death, you would expect there's a lot more in a lot of other places. I know of one guy who was giving her $100 a week for 10 years. So that's, that's just one guy that was.
And she didn't work, did she? She didn't have like a regular job.
She did not have a straight job as far as I could find out. I don't think she ever had a straight job. Once she was a reporter in Washington for a little while. She wanted to be like a CNN, hard-hitting, opinion shaper. But she didn't make the cut, and then she went back to Ohio and had a bunch of kids and opened up her prophesizing businesses.
Wow. That is crazy. Cults are crazy to me. And that is even still active and going on today, and it is a virtual cult. Does it have a name?
Nope. It's just I named them the Shrinerites, but they don't. It's just Jerry Shriner, Bible codes. Yeah. Nope. They just talk about God. They don't even have a name. That's too structured, I guess.
Wow. Wow, Tony, that is some crazy shit. I am sure when you were writing this, you're just probably just going, wow.
It was difficult. Like I told you 4 stories already today that didn't make the book, right? It was difficult to figure out what lines to chase. And I've got to say, I had 3 of my friends look at the first draft of the book, and I'm glad they're still my friends, because it was just insane. It was maybe a third as much as made it into the book, and not in the same order at all, because it's just, as we were talking today, we're like, oh yeah, and I have to talk about this, and if I want to explain this, then I have to talk about the other thing. And finding a way to kind of get that in like a streamlined order was really difficult. And there were some stories that I just, like the story of the guy that went and lived at her house, right? I would love to have told that story, but I couldn't make it fit, and I didn't want to bore people, So there was a lot of, sometimes we get it, she's crazy. It's kind of and that wasn't what I wanted the book about. I didn't want the book to be just a list of, all of these bananas things. I wanted to talk about like why people were so drawn to this woman who they knew nothing about, and there was nothing interesting about her. She didn't even have a nice voice. There was nothing at all interesting about Sherry Shriner, and people were just going to the mat for her. And
that is absolutely crazy. What is the name of the book again?
It's called Dragged into the Light: Truthers, Reptilians, Super Soldiers, and Death Inside an Online Cult.
And where is it available?
It's every place now. If you have a local bookstore, I'd like it if you ask them. I'm actually going to try and undertake a small book tour this summer, and I'll put the dates up on draggedintothelight.com. And otherwise, but if you'd like to buy it on Amazon, I'd rather you buy it than not have you buy it. So yes, please, on Amazon. You can search it. It's out May 25th, but it's available for pre-order up until May 25th.
And are you looking at maybe making it into an audiobook?
Yes, I'm recording the audiobook myself. Don't tell my publisher, but that's not coming out on May 25th.
It's our secret.
I think the middle of June is probably a better target date for that.
Cool. Well, Tony, thank you so much for being with us. That is some crazy shit. I'm gonna have to check out the book because, and this is still an active cult. It's like a lot of times when you hear about cults, you hear about the end of the cult, right? But this is still a very active, no-name cult.
Yes.
Online. That is crazy to me.
If you promise not to lose your mind or to start making orgone, if you go to the BibleCodesRevealed.com is, I think, their main site, and that's where you can get more information. But please be careful.
Well, I might have to look into that orgone stuff myself.
I'm sorry. I have one here if you'd like to see it. I bought one because I felt like it would be dumb not to buy one.
Oh.
And so how do you use it?
I think you're supposed to put it on a necklace, but I'm not that committed. It's just a paperweight in an office with no hair.
That's funny.
Well, Tony, again, thank you so much for being a part of that Some Crazy Shit. We enjoyed having you. It's crazy. That definitely meets the criteria for crazy shit.
That did.
Excellent.
Okay, I didn't have much to say during that whole thing because I was tripping.
Well, I'm sorry. I felt like I kind of asked all the questions, but James, I'm fascinated with cults.
No, and that's cool, but it just amazes me how people can wield that kind of power over other people.
Online.
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 It's not like, and then he said she wasn't, she didn't have a voice, beautiful voice, or, and you're not in person, so even if she was charismatic, you can't project that online really, so much. Yeah, I was just blown away by that.
Well, you know what it shows me? It just shows me that when I think of cults, it just, to me, shows how desperate people are to believe whatever, that they'll grasp onto whatever. That's why I think sometimes people are so susceptible to cults, right? And cults are scary. It's some scary shit.
They are scary. And, has there ever been, now this may be naive of me to say, but has there ever been a good cult?
Well, James, if you want to look at it, you could call, and I'm not meaning to offend no one with this statement.
All religions, you could say, are a cult.
But you can say all religions are a cult. Really?
Right, but let's say, throw out the big ones, is there a cult of the Weeping Willow, that this does, you know what I mean?
What about the Hare Krishnas? Didn't they just go around and, give stuff at the airport and, weren't they?
I remember when I was a little kid, they'd be down there and they'd be clinking.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what they believed, and I know that they're still around, but weren't they, when I would see them, they were always dancing or trying to give you a flower or something. I don't know. I don't know much about
No,
them.
That's true. I don't either. Because that was when I was a kid.
But I will say that cults are a trip. I enjoyed listening. I could listen to Tony's stories all day, and I'm sure he had more of them. The stories he told us aren't even in the book.
Right, and that's bonus. We brought you
Right?
bonus, listeners.
Bonus. So if you get the book Dragged Into the Light, available on Amazon and where all books are sold, you got 4 stories that he shared with us today that aren't even in the book, and that's some crazy shit. And she just recently died in 2018, and this cult is still active today.
And now you know what would be a trip? Okay, so I'm gonna check out that website, Cal. Now you make sure, because you know how I like to run towards the white.
Well, I need you to come back. So when you check
Right.
out the website, I'm gonna need you to come back.
I'll have to check in with you. Because before I'll know it, I'll be saying, Kelly, there's reptilians everywhere. I see them everywhere.
Well, I'm gonna need you to come back. So, but I do like how he brought up David Icke, because when we did our show on reptilians, he is right. He is the dude that started the whole Queen Mums of reptilian and all that good stuff. So yes.
Yeah, he was the one who brought it about, and we did an episode. People, check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, James, that is all for today. I don't have anything for random bullshit unless you do.
Hey, no, that's bullshit. You don't have random bullshit.
Well, I'm not the one that always has to come up with the random bullshit,
okay.
James.
Let's see.
And you can't do it like off the top of your dome. So we just won't do one this time. But you are more than welcome to come up with topics for random bullshit. But the last couple of topics, it has been me bringing them to the table. You are a co-host.
I thought that was your feature.
That's not. I don't have a feature. I just thought we'd, trying to make it. I like the way that how you did that. That's good, but that's not gonna work. So next time, James, random bullshit's on you. You read all the time. I'm sure you've come across something we could talk about.
That is true. All right, I will. I'll be more of a contributor to random bullshit.
Yes, thank you. So I don't have anything else. It's always a pleasure. Next week we will have yet another guest. We're killing it on the guest.
We got some good ones lined up, people.
We really do. We really, really do. We appreciate you listening. Don't forget, you can check out our website, thatsomecrazyshit.com podcast. We are on Facebook, K&J's podcast. We're on Instagram, that's_some_crazy_shit. We are on Twitter, not LinkedIn appropriate. And we have a YouTube channel. And if you haven't, go to YouTube and subscribe to our channel, because I think next season we're going to do something a little different.
Teaser.
But we still got all of this season, so we got a lot of good stuff that we're thinking about. So anyway, follow us on social media. If you want to email us, it's james@thatsomecrazyshitpodcast.com or kelly@thatsomecrazyshitpodcast.com. We would love to hear from you. That's all I've got, James. You?
No, other than keep your minds open, people.